Shortly after my divorce was finalized, I received a massive dividend payment from a company I'd invested in. Meanwhile, my ex-husband was celebrating his wedding to his mistress in grand style. But during that very wedding reception, a single sentence from his sister would leave him frozen, utterly speechless. I was sitting on a long bench outside the marriage bureau at City Hall, a freshly printed divorce agreement in my hands. The black ink on the white paper, line by line, felt as cold as ice. The man standing before me was impeccably, almost comically, dressed. A crisp white shirt, a lustrous, heavy navy blue suit, and hair perfectly styled. You'd think he was attending his own wedding reception, not ending a 3-year marriage. His name was Ryan. 3 years ago, I had called him my husband. But in that moment, I realized I had to start practicing the words ex-husband. Standing next to Ryan was a woman a few years younger than me. Her name was Jessica. She wore a tight, cream-colored dress, carried a designer handbag, and had lips painted a stark, vivid red. She linked her arm through Ryan's, her chin held slightly high, her gaze toward me undisguised in its triumph. It was a smile that one woman recognizes on another instantly. No words were needed. It wasn't the smile of someone who is truly loved, but of someone who believes they have just seized the most valuable prize in the world. Ryan glanced at his watch and scowled. "Clara. What are you waiting for? Just sign it. We have places to be." I looked down at the documents in front of me. The condo was in his mother's name. The car was in his name. The joint bank account had been all but emptied weeks ago. And the agreement clearly stated that for my 3 years as his wife, I would receive a final settlement of $25,000. I lifted my head and looked him straight in the eye. "Ryan, for the past 3 years, when your mother was sick, I was the one who nursed her. When your sister got married, I was the one who helped pay for it. When your company was struggling for funds, I even took out the money my own mother left me to bail you out. And now, you're letting me go for $25,000. Jessica let out a small, tinkling laugh. The sound was sweet, but sharp as a razor. "Clara, that's a funny way of putting it. The company belongs to Ryan, and the assets have been divided properly. I think it's very generous of him to give you that much. If this had gone to court, you might have gotten a lot less." Ryan put his hand on Jessica's waist, as if to show me exactly who he had chosen. "Jessica's right, Clara, don't make a scene. Just sign it. The longer you drag this out, the worse it is for you." I saw his fingers on another woman's waist and was surprised that it didn't hurt as much as I'd imagined. Perhaps a woman who has been hurt for so long finds her tears have simply run dry by the final moment. I picked up the pen and put its tip to the paper. I signed my name, Clara. Ryan snatched the agreement immediately, scanning every corner to make sure I hadn't added a single word. Once he confirmed everything was as he wanted, he let out a sigh of relief, took Jessica's hand, and turned his back on me. He didn't ask where I would go, what I would eat, or how I would live. Not a single word. As I walked out of the City Hall building, the sun was still glaring brightly off the white concrete. A breeze blew past, and I felt a chill run down my spine, even though it was a sweltering day in New York City. Before I could even try to hail a cab, I heard a laugh from behind me. "Well, if it isn't Clara. Is it all over?" I turned to see Ryan's sister, Brenda. She was wearing a flamboyant red cocktail dress, her hair piled high, a gold necklace around her neck, and a wedding gift in her hand. She looked radiant, as if she were on her way to a joyous celebration. Brenda descended the steps, looking me up and down from head to toe before clicking her tongue. "So, you got the 25,000? Well, good for you. You can go back to whatever small town you came from, open up a little shop, and find some quiet man to settle down with. It's tough for a divorced woman, you know." I remained silent. Brenda, growing bolder, leaned in closer. "You know, this afternoon, Ryan and Jessica are having a party at the Grand Astoria Hotel. Why don't you come have a glass of champagne to celebrate? Oh, but on second thought, don't. In those clothes, you obviously don't own anything decent. It would be an embarrassment to our family if you showed up." She finished with a loud, cackling laugh. As if that weren't enough, she turned back to add one more thing. "Honestly, Clara, you've got no luck. You were with him for 3 years and couldn't even give him a child. It's no wonder Ryan left you. Look at Jessica. She's young, beautiful, has a good personality, and comes from a good family. She's the kind of woman my brother deserves." I stood there, listening to every word. It wasn't the kind of verbal assault that shatters you in an instant. Instead, it was like a slow, steady drip of poison that seeps into your heart and creates a swamp. For the past 3 years, I had been living in that swamp without even realizing it. After Brenda left, I finally took out my phone to open a ride-sharing app. Just then, the screen lit up with a notification from my bank. A deposit of $62,500,000 has been made to your account. I froze. $62.5 million. I thought I was seeing things. I counted the zeros again and again. My heart started pounding, and my hands began to shake. A moment later, a message came through from my old college friend, Leo. Clara, did you get the dividend payment? My company just got acquired by a major corporation. You were an early-stage investor, so your share should be around $6.25 million. Can you check? I was stunned. $6.25 million. Then why did my account have over $60 million? Before I could reply, my phone rang. It was the bank. A polite man's voice identified himself as my new wealth management advisor. He confirmed the large deposit and informed me that their system was currently investigating a possible error, as it appeared an extra zero may have been added to the transfer. After hanging up, I stood in the middle of the City Hall Plaza, clutching my phone. 3 months ago, when Leo had told me he'd started a tech company in San Francisco, but needed last-minute funding to finish his product, I'd sent him the last of my personal savings, $20,000. At the time, Ryan had called me an idiot. He'd said a woman who couldn't hold on to her money would be poor for the rest of her life. I never imagined that money would turn into company stock. And I certainly never dreamed that on the very day I was being cast out of my marriage, fate would place such a powerful card in my hands. I looked down the road. The Grand Astoria was a 20-minute drive from here. Ryan was there, celebrating his wedding to Jessica. My mother-in-law would be smiling with satisfaction. Brenda was probably on stage, telling all their relatives what a terrible person I was. I took a deep breath, raised my hand, and hailed a taxi. The driver rolled down the window. Where to? I opened the door, got in, and said in a voice so calm it surprised even me. The Grand Astoria Hotel, please. As the car pulled away, the city streets blurred past the window. I saw my faint reflection in the glass. A worn-out shirt. Faded black pants, hair hastily tied back, and a pale face from a sleepless night. But for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel sorry for myself. I just felt a sense of irony. Ryan, you think you bought 3 years of my life for $25,000? You think I walked away from your home with nothing? Fine. This afternoon, I'll come drink your celebratory champagne. Not to cry. But to show your entire family that the person you trampled into the mud was never as worthless as you thought. When the taxi arrived at the Grand Astoria, the cheerful sounds of wedding music were already spilling out from the lobby. On any other day, the happy melody would have meant nothing. But today, it felt like a relentless drumming against my chest, not a sharp, screaming pain, but a deep, cold, and persistent ache. I paid the fare, got out, and stood for a moment at the hotel entrance. A large floral arch made of red roses and white orchids stood at the entrance. In the center was a welcome board with a photo of Ryan and Jessica. They were posed closely together, Ryan in a white tuxedo and Jessica in a wedding gown, both beaming. Below them were the words, "Celebrating the wedding of Ryan and Jessica." I couldn't help but laugh at those words. This morning, he had signed divorce papers at City Hall. By the afternoon, he was here, the groom to another woman. Was marriage to a man just like an old coat, something you change out of when you're tired of it? And was the person who had washed, mended, and cared for that coat for years simply to be thrown out the door? I looked down at myself. The white shirt was old, the cuffs slightly frayed. The black pants were plain, and the shoes were a pair of flats I'd bought at a discount store. Compared to the glittering dresses, tailored suits, and perfect makeup of the people walking into the hotel, I was completely out of place. But strangely, I felt no shame. This was exactly how I wanted to appear. As the woman they had looked down upon just hours ago. As the woman they thought should take her pittance and disappear. Inside, a woman in a red dress at the reception desk stopped me. "Excuse me, miss. May I see your invitation?" she asked politely. I looked at her calmly. "I'm the groom's ex-wife. I'm here to offer my congratulations." The receptionist froze for a second. A look of bewilderment crossing her face. She had probably seen all sorts of things working at weddings, but an ex-wife showing up to her ex-husband's wedding on the very day of their divorce was likely a new one. I had no intention of making things difficult for her, so I gave a slight nod and walked straight to the elevators. The reception was on the 3rd floor. As the elevator doors opened, a wave of laughter washed over me. The entire ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers. Tables were draped in white linen, each with a centerpiece of fresh flowers. Nearly 40 tables were filled with guests. Ryan's family, relatives from out of town, business associates, old neighbors. Everyone was dressed in their finest, their faces bright and cheerful, as if this were a truly joyous occasion and not a shamelessly rushed changing of the guard. I chose an inconspicuous table in the corner and sat down. At first, no one noticed me. It made sense. In their eyes, I was never someone worth remembering anyway. For 3 years as the wife in this family, at every holiday and party, I was the one in the kitchen, quietly washing vegetables, chopping onions, clearing plates, and pouring tea. They were more used to seeing me with my head down, working, than seeing me seated as a guest in the middle of the room. On the stage, the MC was speaking in a booming, cheerful voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, today is a most joyous day for Ryan and Jessica. Please, let's welcome them with a huge round of applause as they begin their new life together." Applause thundered as the main doors opened. Ryan walked in, holding Jessica's hand, as music swelled. He was smiling so brightly, a smile he had rarely shown me in 3 years. He had once told me that the pressures of work left a man too exhausted to offer sweet words when he came home. Yet here he was, smiling gently, adjusting the train of Jessica's dress, helping her onto the stage, and gazing at her with loving eyes in front of everyone. I sat quietly, my hands in my lap. I wasn't jealous. I just felt foolish. For 3 years, I had believed his clumsy excuses. I thought he was just awkward, that he didn't know how to be gentle, that if I just tried a little harder, was a little more patient, one day he would see my devotion. But now I understood. Men aren't incapable of being gentle with a woman. They just choose who they want to be gentle with. My mother-in-law, Carol, was seated at the head table. She wore an elegant purple dress and a gold bracelet, her face a mask of pure delight. She grasped the hand of the person next to her and said, in a voice loud enough for me to hear, "Our Jessica is just wonderful, beautiful, a great personality, well-educated, and from a respectable family. It's about time our Ryan came to his senses." Brenda, sitting beside her, immediately chimed in. "You're so right, Mom. She's nothing like that last one, Clara. Always looking so shabby, an embarrassment wherever we went. And after 3 years, she couldn't even give you a grandchild to hold." Carol sighed, her tone dripping with mock pity. "Well, let's not talk about her. It's bad luck on a happy day like this. We've finally gotten rid of that jinx, after all." Hearing that, I couldn't help but let out a small, quiet laugh. A jinx. That's what they called me. But for 3 years, when Carol had appendicitis, who was it that stayed up all night at the hospital caring for her? When Ryan's younger sister got married and her fiancé's family demanded more money, who was it that provided the funds? When Ryan was trying to land his first big contract, who was it that went with him to meet every client, staying up late in coffee shops to help him prepare? They forgot all of that so easily. It seemed that when people decided to be heartless, gratitude was the first thing they sold off cheap. I opened my phone and looked at the bank notification again. The number $62,500,000 was cold and clear. Just then, the MC invited Brenda to the stage to give a speech. Brenda smoothed down her red dress and walked onto the stage with a radiant smile, clutching the microphone with both hands as if she were about to deliver a profound sermon. "To our families and friends, I am Ryan's sister, Brenda. Today, seeing my brother find his true happiness, my heart is filled with joy." The room applauded. Brenda paused, smiled, and continued. "The truth is, my brother Ryan was previously in a very unhappy marriage. His ex-wife was a poor, tactless woman who was no help to her husband at all. For 3 years, she couldn't have children, brought no luck to the family, and our business struggled. Thankfully, Ryan came to his senses in time and cut ties with her to start a new life with Jessica." A few tables chuckled, and people started whispering to each other. Brenda, emboldened, went on. "Just this morning at City Hall, she was still demanding money. But in the end, she walked away with just $25,000. I suppose that's what happens when a woman can't hold on to her man." I set my glass down on the table. It made a tiny sound, but in my heart, it felt as though something heavy had finally dropped. It wasn't anger. It was my last shred of hesitation. I stood up. The woman next to me, thinking I was going to the restroom, gently tugged my arm. "Miss, the main course is coming soon. You don't want it to get cold." I smiled at her but said nothing as I began walking, step by step, toward the stage. At first, no one noticed. All eyes were still on Brenda, on Ryan, on Jessica. But as I neared the head table, the first person to see me was my mother-in-law, Carol. The smile froze on her face, and she shot up from her seat. "Clara? What are you doing here?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the nearby tables turn. On stage, Brenda saw me too, and her face changed. Her hand on the microphone trembled slightly before her voice turned shrill. You have the nerve to show up here? Clara, are you trying to ruin my brother's wedding?" The entire ballroom was slowly falling silent. Ryan turned and saw me. In that instant, I saw clear panic in his eyes, which quickly turned to anger. He stepped off the stage and stood in front of me. His voice low but seething. "Clara, don't cause a scene. We can talk later. This is my wedding day." I looked at him and asked quietly. "Your wedding day? What about my day of sorrow?" Jessica rushed over and grabbed Ryan's arm, her eyes conveniently welling up with tears. "Clara, I understand how you feel. But Ryan and I truly love each other. The papers are signed. For everyone's sake, can't you have a little dignity?" I turned to her. "Dignity? Did you have any for me when I was still his legal wife?" Jessica's face went pale. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd. Some pitied me, others called me obsessive. A divorced woman showing up like this? She has no pride. Brenda came down from the stage, her high heels clicking sharply on the floor. She stood in front of me, pointing a finger straight at my face. "Clara, look at yourself. Aren't you ashamed to walk into a 5-star hotel dressed like that? We gave you $25,000. That was more than generous. What more could you possibly want?" I looked at the finger pointed inches from my face, then calmly took out my phone. "Brenda, are you finished speaking?" Brenda was momentarily speechless. I opened the bank notification and held the screen up for Ryan to see, for Brenda to see, for Carol to see, and for Jessica to see. "So now, please, take a good look. See just how much the poor, pathetic woman you speak of just received." Ryan leaned in to look at the screen, and in an instant, the color drained from his face. Brenda snatched the phone from my hand and brought it close to her face. Her lips trembled as she counted the zeros, one by one, before her voice cracked. 60. $2.5 million? A roar of murmurs erupted from the crowd. I took my phone back and looked at the frozen faces before me, then smiled. "Yes. Just enough to buy a celebratory glass of champagne, I think." The ballroom fell silent for a few seconds, as if someone had hit a mute button. Then, the sound exploded in layers, whispers, gasps, people leaning in to talk to each other, creating a chaotic symphony I had never been the center of before. But strangely, I felt no fear. In fact, my mind had never been clearer, like someone waking from a long dream. Ryan stood before me, his eyes fixed on the phone I had just put away. His lips trembled slightly, trying to form words but unable to decide what they should be. I looked at him, no longer with any sense of familiarity, only as a stranger stunned by a number beyond his imagination. Brenda was different. Still in disbelief, she shrieked. "That's impossible. Clara, you faked this, didn't you? Anyone can Photoshop a banking app these days." I had to laugh. Not a mocking laugh, but a laugh of sheer familiarity with this kind of reaction. When people are faced with a truth they can't accept, they start looking for ways to deny it. "Brenda, if you think it's fake, why don't you call the bank and verify it? Or perhaps I could transfer you a few $100,000 as a test. Would you like to see if it's real money or fake money?" My words drew a few chuckles from the surrounding tables. Brenda was speechless, still clutching the phone she hadn't returned, but she said nothing more. My mother-in-law, Carol, came forward, her steps unsteady, her voice trembling. "Clara, is it true? Is that money really yours?" I turned to her. 3 years of being her daughter-in-law. I used to call her mom, so naturally, without a second thought. But now, the word was stuck in my throat. "Why are you asking me now? This morning, you called me a jinx, something to be thrown out. Why should it matter to you how much money I have?" Carol was stunned into silence, her eyes turning red. I couldn't tell if it was from shame or something else. Jessica, who had been silent until now, spoke up from beside Ryan. Her voice had lost its earlier sweetness and was now trembling. "Clara, I had no idea you had this kind of situation. If I had known..." I looked at her. "If you had known, you wouldn't have stolen my husband?" Jessica froze, her lips pressed into a tight line. I said nothing more and turned back to Ryan. "You want to know where this money came from, don't you?" Ryan swallowed hard and gave a slight nod. 3 months ago, I invested the last of my savings into a startup founded by a college friend. Today, that company was acquired, and as a shareholder, I received my dividend payment. It's as simple as that. A man at a nearby table chimed in, "What kind of investment pays off like that?" Without looking at him, I said, not everyone has the courage to invest their last dollar into something uncertain. I did. And so, I reaped the rewards. My words silenced several people. Perhaps they were beginning to understand that what they were witnessing wasn't just a stroke of dumb luck, but the result of a decision they themselves would never have made. Ryan suddenly took a step forward, his voice hoarse. "Clara, why didn't you tell me about this?" I met his gaze and answered slowly. "What would have been the point? So you could stop me? Or so you could use that money for your company's operating expenses again?" Ryan fell silent. I knew he understood what I meant. For the past 3 years, every time his company was in trouble, he would look at me with those eyes, a mixture of pleading and coercion. And every time, I had given in. Every single time. Just then, Brenda seemed to snap out of her stupor and grabbed Ryan's arm. "Ryan, don't just stand there. So what if she has money? That's her problem. This is your wedding day." Her words were like an invisible slap. Yes, this was Ryan and Jessica's wedding day. But at this moment, no one seemed to remember that. All eyes were on me. The MC on stage was frozen, microphone in hand, unsure of what to do. I scanned the room once more and said slowly, "I didn't come here to ruin this wedding. I just have one thing to say before I leave." No one interrupted me, not even Ryan. He stood perfectly still. I took a deep breath and continued, my words clear and deliberate. 3 years ago, when I married into this family, I had nothing. But I had a sincere heart. I believed that if I lived honestly and took care of my family, one day I would be cherished. I looked at Carol, then at Brenda. But I've learned that in some places, sincerity isn't seen as a virtue. It's seen as foolishness. The air in the room grew heavy. I'm not here to blame anyone. Everyone chooses their own path. Ryan chose money. Brenda chose appearances. My mother-in-law chose profit. And I chose to believe in people. I paused for a moment. But this time, I won't make the wrong choice again. Ryan suddenly lunged forward, his voice frantic. "Clara, don't say that. I didn't mean for it to be like this." I held up a hand, stopping him. "No explanation is necessary. I understand now." Beside him, Jessica's expression began to falter. The look of victory was gone, replaced by a very real anxiety. Perhaps she was beginning to realize that the man she was clinging to wasn't the prize she thought he was. Brenda tried to maintain her aggressive tone. "Clara, are you finished with your speech? If you are, then leave. Don't waste everyone's time." I turned to her. "Brenda, a moment ago, you called me poor, and said I had no right to be here. Do you still feel that way?" Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. Not because she didn't want to speak, but because she didn't know what to say. I smiled. "It's fine, I don't need an answer." I turned to leave. Just then, a loud crash echoed from behind me. Crash. Someone had bumped into the champagne tower next to the stage, and it had collapsed. Golden champagne flooded the floor, and the sound of shattering glass filled the ballroom. Everyone gasped and turned to look. I didn't know who had knocked it over, but to me, the sight looked exactly like the end of my marriage, shattered into pieces, impossible to put back together. I kept walking without looking back. From behind me, I heard Ryan's voice. No longer calm. "Clara. Wait." I stopped. I didn't turn around, just stood there quietly. Ryan ran up to me, out of breath, his voice almost pleading. "Clara, about this? Can't we talk about this again?" I closed my eyes for a silent second, then opened them. What is there to talk about? I stood with my back to Ryan for a few seconds, his ragged breathing just behind me. The feeling was familiar. When his company was in trouble, he used to stand behind me just like this, whispering gentle words I couldn't refuse. But today, nothing was the same. He was still him, but I was different. I turned around slowly. "What is there to talk about?" Ryan looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion, desperately trying to maintain his composure. He looked like someone who had just lost something immensely valuable but hadn't yet fully grasped its importance. "Clara. About the divorce, about today. I think I was too hasty. So, I was wondering if we could talk it over?" As soon as he said it, a new wave of murmurs swept through the room. No one had expected a groom to say something like that in front of his new bride on his wedding day. Behind Ryan, Jessica stood pale as a ghost, clutching the hem of her wedding dress, her lips trembling, unable to speak. And Brenda stared at her brother, her mouth agape in disbelief. I looked at Ryan for a long moment, then asked quietly, "Talk it over? How?" Ryan swallowed hard and lowered his voice. "Well, we only just signed the papers. The whole process isn't finalized yet. If you wanted to, we could. He didn't finish, but everyone knew what he meant. The groom, in the middle of his own wedding, wanted to get back together with his ex-wife. The ballroom fell silent. I started to laugh. This time, out loud. Not in mockery, but because the sheer irony of the situation was overwhelming. Ryan, are you telling me that you want to get back with me, right here, in front of your new bride? Ryan didn't look at Jessica. His eyes were only on me. I know it's wrong to say this now, but Clara. I've realized. I was so wrong. At that moment, Jessica couldn't take it anymore and yanked on Ryan's arm. Ryan, what are you saying? This is our wedding day. Ryan shook her hand off, his voice laced with irritation. Be quiet. I'm talking right now. The way he brushed her hand away was exactly how he used to brush mine away when I tried to talk to him about something serious. Back then, I thought I was bothering him. Now I knew the truth. It wasn't that I was a bother, it was that in his eyes, my feelings weren't even worth listening to. Jessica stood there, stunned, as tears streamed down her face, smudging her perfect makeup. I watched, but my heart remained perfectly still. Ryan turned back to me, his voice low. Clara, I know I hurt you. But I swear, in my heart, you were the one I truly loved. I was just being a fool. I looked him straight in the eye. Foolish enough to marry someone else? Ryan was at a loss for words. I didn't realize how important you were to me. I shook my head slowly. No, it's not that you didn't realize. You knew. You just thought I would never leave, no matter what you did. My words silenced him. Yes, for 3 years, I had always been there. No matter how cold he was, how distant, how suspiciously he behaved, I was always there, waiting, believing. When someone stays by your side for too long, you start to assume they'll be there forever. Until one day, they're gone. Brenda, unable to stand it any longer, interjected. Clara, stop the act. Ryan is only saying this because you have money now. Don't get the wrong idea. I turned to Brenda. You're right. If I didn't have this money, would he be standing here, saying these things? Ryan said frantically. No, Clara. It's not about the money. I stared at him. Ryan, can you even say that and believe it yourself? Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. Not because he didn't want to speak, but because even he wasn't sure if he was telling the truth. I took a breath and continued in a steady voice. You know, when Brenda was up on that stage, calling me poor, unworthy, and saying you left me because I couldn't have children, the old me might have cried. But now, I just find it comical. I looked at each member of his family. Because I've realized it wasn't that I wasn't good enough. It's that none of you were qualified to judge me. The air in the room felt as heavy as lead. My former mother-in-law, Carol, shuffled forward, her voice weak. Clara, please. Don't say that. I was wrong. I turned to her. Her eyes no longer held their usual arrogance, only fear and regret. 3 months ago, when she was in the hospital, I had stayed up all night with her, feeding her porridge one spoonful at a time, wiping the sweat from her brow. She had held my hand and called me a good daughter-in-law. But as soon as she was discharged, she advised Ryan to leave me. People change so quickly. I don't blame you, Carol. You just chose what was most profitable for you. Carol looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Ryan took another step closer, his voice pleading. Clara, I was wrong. Please, just give me one more chance. I'll make it up to you, I promise. I held up my hand, and he stopped. I looked him straight in the eye and said slowly, do you know what I resent you for the most? Ryan shook his head, his eyes red. It's not that you cheated. It's not that you hid assets. It's not that you threw me out of the house. I took a breath. It's that you made me feel like an idiot. The words were soft, but they landed with immense weight. I believed in you. I gave you all my money, all my love. I thought I was building a family. But in reality, I was just supporting a man who didn't know the meaning of gratitude. Ryan shuddered. Clara. I shook my head. Don't call me that anymore. It sounds hypocritical. I turned my back to him. We are over. Who you marry, how you live your life, it has nothing to do with me anymore. Ryan panicked and stepped forward to grab my arm. Clara, don't go. I stepped back, evading his touch. You should get back on stage. Your bride is still standing over there. My words were like a knife. Ryan turned and looked at Jessica, who stood a few feet away, still crying, looking at him with a mixture of pain and despair. It was probably in that moment that she finally understood. If this man could abandon his ex-wife for her, he could just as easily abandon her for someone else, or for something more valuable. I said nothing more. I just started walking. This time, no one tried to stop me. No one called me unworthy. The only sound in the ballroom was the clear, rhythmic click of my shoes on the tiled floor, marking the end of an old story. From behind me, I heard Ryan's defeated voice. Clara, so you're really not coming back? I paused for a second, without turning around. No. Just one word. But it was the final period on a 3-year sentence. I walked out of the ballroom, and the glass doors closed behind me. Outside, a gentle evening breeze was blowing, and the sunlight had softened. I stood there for a moment and took out my phone. A message from Leo caught my eye. Clara, we need to talk. It looks like there was an error with the amount the bank transferred earlier. I froze, my finger hovering over the screen. A strange feeling washed over me. I opened the message, and in that instant, I knew. This wasn't over yet. I stood in front of the Grand Astoria, still holding my phone. I hadn't finished reading Leo's message, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. The evening breeze gently rustled my hair, and my mind felt suddenly, unnervingly clear. The scene in the ballroom had been like a massive wave. Now, as it receded, the raw, unvarnished truth was being exposed. I took a deep breath and opened the message fully. Clara, accounting just called. There was a system error during the wire transfer. Your share was supposed to be $6,250,000, but they accidentally sent $62,500,000. They'll be reversing the excess amount by tomorrow at the latest, so please don't spend it. After reading it, I stood there for a few seconds. There was no surprise, no panic. It was just everything returning to its proper place. I looked at the number on the screen again. $6.25 million. For most people, that was still a fortune. For me, it was enough to change my life. But more importantly, it was something I had earned on my own. It wasn't a gift or a handout. A faint smile touched my lips. Fate hadn't given me an impossibly lucky break, but it hadn't left me with nothing, either. And that was enough. Just as I was about to put my phone away, I heard a frantic voice from behind me. Clara! I turned to see Ryan running out of the hotel. His suit was rumpled, his tie was crooked, and his hair was no longer perfectly styled. He looked less like a groom and more like someone fleeing a fire. He stopped in front of me, catching his breath. Clara! You're still here. I looked at him calmly. Yes. I was just about to leave. Ryan nodded repeatedly, as if afraid I might vanish. Good, I was afraid. He didn't finish, but his eyes clearly showed he feared losing the chance to say something. I didn't rush him. Is there something else you wanted to say? Ryan looked at me, and his expression was slightly different now. It was no longer just confusion, it was laced with a flicker of rapid calculation. Clara, what I said in there, I meant it. I want to start over with you, and it's not about the money. I didn't interrupt him, just let him speak. He continued, I've been thinking. For the past 3 years, you were the one by my side. You were the one who understood me. Jessica. She was just a mistake. I raised a subtle eyebrow. A mistake you were about to marry? Ryan faltered for a second, then rushed to explain. I got swept up in it. And besides, I always thought you'd never leave me, so I just. He trailed off, realizing he had just let the truth slip out. I nodded. That's right. You thought I would never leave, so you could do whatever you wanted. Ryan looked down. Clara, I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the man before me, once my husband, my everything, the man I believed could give me a family. But now, I saw him as a stranger. Ryan. It was the first time I had called him by his name so formally. He looked up, startled. Clara. Why are you calling me that? Because I think I should. The air between us grew heavy. I continued, my voice flat. You said you want to start over. Let me ask you one question. Ryan's head snapped up. Anything. If I didn't have that money today, if I was still just the woman in the old shirt and worn-out shoes, being laughed at by your family in that ballroom, would you have run all the way out here to stop me? The question wasn't loud, but it was enough to freeze him. He opened his mouth to say yes, but the word wouldn't come out. He knew the answer. I looked at him quietly. You don't have to answer. I already know. Ryan shook his head, his voice frantic. No, Clara, you're misunderstanding. You really love money. I cut him off, my tone firm. Ryan froze. I looked him straight in the eye. You don't love me. You don't love Jessica. You love the feeling of being superior, of being admired, of being on top. You'll be with whoever gives you that feeling. Ryan trembled. I'm not that kind of person. My voice didn't rise. 3 years ago, I gave you financial stability, so you married me. When Jessica came along and offered money, looks, and connections, you chose her. And now that you think I have even more money, you want to come back again. I took a breath. Ryan, you're not choosing a person. You're choosing a profit margin. Ryan's face fell. He didn't argue or make excuses. He couldn't. I let out a quiet sigh. You know, in the ballroom. When you said you wanted to start over, I didn't feel angry. I just felt pity. Ryan looked up, confused. Pity. Yes. Pity that a man can go through life not even knowing what he truly wants, just jumping at whatever seems most beneficial at the moment. The wind blew, gently rustling my clothes. I put my phone back in my bag. And about the money, I said. Ryan's head shot up instantly, his eyes shining with a faint but distinct glimmer. I didn't miss it. The amount you saw was a mistake. My actual share is closer to 6 million. Ryan froze. His expression shifted with lightning speed from hope, to surprise, and back to calculation. It was only for a moment, but it was enough for me to understand. If he had even a sliver of emotional reason to want me back before, that part had now shrunk considerably. $6 million was no longer his golden ticket. I smiled. See? The number changes, and so does the look in your eyes. Ryan shook his head frantically. No, 6 million is still a lot of money. You don't have to make excuses, I said quietly. Whether it's 6 million or 60, I'm not coming back. Those words, this time, were for me as much as for him. I turned away. You should go back inside. Your wedding isn't over yet, is it? Ryan stood there, rooted to the spot. Clara. I didn't look back. Is there anything else? His voice was very small. Will you be happy? I paused for a second. If he had asked me that a year ago, I might have cried. I'm just getting started, I said. And you are just ending. I started walking not quickly, not in a rush, just forward. This time, Ryan didn't follow. Perhaps he finally understood that once you let something go, you can never pick it up again. I reached the main street, hailed a cab, and got in. I leaned back against the seat and looked out the window as the Grand Astoria receded in the distance. A marriage, a family, a past, all of it faded away with the view. My phone buzzed again. It was another message from Leo. Sorry about that, Clara. Accounting is sorting it out. But even so, your share is the largest among the individual investors. And the company is going public soon. I texted back a short reply. Okay, got it. I turned off the screen and closed my eyes. My mind was no longer filled with the sound of arguments, insults, or scornful looks. There was just a void. But it wasn't a frightening void. It was a blank slate, ready for something new. The car turned onto a major avenue, and the setting sun cast a pale gold light on the asphalt. I opened my eyes. For the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't thinking about Ryan. I wasn't thinking about Jessica or my ex-husband's family. I was thinking about me. What I would do now. Where I would go. Who I would become. And I knew that this time, I wouldn't make the wrong choice. The taxi sped through the city streets, which felt both familiar and strangely new. I leaned against the seat, watching the people on the sidewalks pass by like figures in a slow-motion film. Ryan's words were no longer echoing in my head, there was only a long, deep silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes only after a storm has passed, not because everything is resolved, but because there is nothing left to break. I didn't go home. In truth, I no longer had a place to call home. The condo I had lived in was in Ryan's mother's name. The paperwork was clear, I had signed away my right to be there that morning. I had lived in that space for 3 years. Every glass, every plate, the curtains, even the pillows, I had chosen them all myself. But in the end, I hadn't been able to take so much as the coat hanging behind the door. When I left, all I had was a small bag with a few changes of clothes and my ID. I gave the driver a new destination. A nice hotel, please. Somewhere in Midtown. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. My clothes probably didn't suggest I was the type to frequent upscale hotels, but he didn't ask any questions, just nodded and kept driving. About 20 minutes later, the car pulled up in front of a large hotel in the heart of Manhattan. It was a tall, gleaming glass building, its lobby bright with the light of chandeliers. I paid the fare, got out, and took a breath before walking inside. 2 young clerks stood at the front desk. One of them looked me up and down, her gaze pausing for a moment before she put on a polite, professional smile. Welcome. Are you checking in? I nodded. Yes. I'd like your best available room for a few days. The clerk typed on her keyboard. Certainly. We have a deluxe room available. It's $400 a night. Will that be acceptable? $400 a night. A week ago, I would have certainly said no. But today, I simply said, that will be fine. The clerk seemed a little surprised, but didn't let it show as she quickly processed my check-in. When I handed her my ID, she looked at my name and asked, will it be just for one guest? I replied, yes, just me. It was a simple answer, but saying it aloud made my heart feel lighter. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't in my ex-husband's home or my parents' house. I was in a place where I didn't have to live according to anyone else's expectations. It was only temporary, but it felt like freedom. I took the key card and went up to my room. I opened the door to a spacious suite with a large white bed and a massive window overlooking the city. I set my bag down and walked to the window, pulling back the curtains. Below, the lights of the New York evening were beginning to sparkle, and the traffic on the streets formed long ribbons of light. I stood there for a long time, not crying, not smiling, just standing. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I wasn't going to answer, but I hit the button anyway. Hello? There was a moment of silence, then a familiar female voice, but without its usual arrogance. Clara. It's Brenda, Ryan's sister. I wasn't surprised. What can I do for you? Brenda took a breath, trying to sound calm. Clara, I'd like to talk to you. Could you come back to the hotel? Or I could come to you. I leaned against the window pane. What about? About today. And about our family. I laughed softly. Brenda, this morning you called me a jinx and said I had no place in your family. Now you're calling me to talk about family? Don't you think that's a little strange? Brenda was silent for a few seconds, then lowered her voice. I'm sorry. If it had been the old me, hearing those 2 words from her might have moved me. But now, they sounded like a key she only used when she needed something. What are you sorry for? Brenda stammered. For the awful things I said, for misunderstanding you. I didn't reply immediately. Brenda, are you apologizing because you realized you were wrong? Or are you apologizing because you found out I have money? My question left her speechless. I could hear her ragged breathing over the phone. Clara. I continued, my voice even. You don't have to answer. I already know. Brenda said frantically, Clara, please don't think that. Our family has always considered you one of us. I laughed. One of you? And yet you threw me out of the house for $25,000? Brenda fell silent. I didn't want to drag it out. If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up. Clara, wait. Brenda said, her voice desperate. Dad wants to talk to you. I froze for a second. Dad? Oh, Ryan's father. He's here, he wants to talk. I was silent. Ryan's father, Arthur. He was the quietest one in the family. For 3 years, he had never defended me, but he had never berated me either. He always kept his distance, never warm, but never hostile. I said, put him on. A moment later, a calm, middle-aged man's voice came on the line. Clara? It's Arthur. Yes, mister. I paused, then continued, Arthur. Are you doing all right? It was a polite, formulaic question, but for some reason, it stung a little. Yes, I'm fine. Arthur sighed. I didn't expect any of this to happen today. I said nothing. I know Ryan has made many mistakes. But whatever happened, you two were married once. I cut him off quietly. What are you trying to say? Arthur was silent for a moment. Clara, I can't ask you to get back with him. But I was hoping you wouldn't push him too far. I frowned. What do you mean? His company. I hear you know many of his clients. If you stop helping him, he'll be in a very difficult position. I understood. This call wasn't about sentiment. It was about business. I stared out the window and said in a calm voice. Arthur, you know how much I helped Ryan's company over the past 3 years. It's only natural that I would stop helping him now. Arthur sighed. I know. But I was hoping you wouldn't take his clients from him. I laughed quietly. Those clients are relationships I built myself. They were never his to begin with. There was silence on the other end of the line. I continued, I won't sabotage him. But I have no intention of yielding, either. That was my final line. I wouldn't seek unfair revenge, but I would no longer be a pushover. Arthur said slowly, I understand. Well, get some rest. I will. I hung up. I placed the phone on the table, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the ceiling. In a single day, every relationship in my life had changed. From a daughter-in-law to a stranger. From someone they looked down on to someone they had to be wary of. I didn't feel happy, but I didn't feel sad either. I just saw things clearly. I saw who was genuine, and who was only by my side when I had something of value. The phone buzzed again. This time it was from Leo. "Clara, do you have time tomorrow? I'd like to talk to you in more detail about the company." I texted back. "Yes, I'd like that." I put the phone down and lay back. The night was growing deeper. Outside, the city was still bright, but inside the room, it was just me. For the first time, however, I didn't feel lonely. Because I knew that starting tomorrow, my life would be mine to decide. I didn't sleep well that night, not because I was worried, but because so many things were being resorted in my mind. It was like a room that hadn't been cleaned in a long time. Now that the door was open, I could see the dust motes dancing in the air and the clutter scattered everywhere. I had to look at each item, one by one, and decide what to keep and what to throw away. And I understood that my past was the same. I couldn't forget it all at once, but I could learn to put it in its proper place. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I opened the curtains, and the morning sun streamed into the room, not too harsh, just right. I stood in front of the mirror for a while and looked at myself. It was the same face, but the look in my eyes was different. There was no more hesitation, no more waiting for someone else's approval. There was something clear and resolute. I changed into a simple but neat outfit I had bought the night before. A white blouse, black trousers, and low-heeled shoes. I tied my hair back neatly and put on only a touch of lipstick. I no longer needed to prove myself to anyone, but I wanted to be presentable for myself. I had arranged to meet Leo at a coffee shop near his office. When I arrived, he was already there. Sitting with a laptop and a stack of papers, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up. He looked just as he had in college. He stood up and smiled when he saw me. "Clara." I nodded and pulled out a chair. "Have you been waiting long?" "No, I just got here." He looked at me for a moment. "Are you okay?" It wasn't a polite question, I could tell he was genuinely concerned. I smiled faintly. "I'm better than you think." Leo nodded and didn't press further about the divorce, which I appreciated. Sometimes, not asking is the greatest form of respect. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. "I asked you here today, not just because of the dividend, but also because of this." I opened the folder. It contained company materials, financial reports, growth projections, and a draft of the post-acquisition shareholder restructuring. Leo explained slowly. "Right now, you're one of the largest individual minority shareholders. After the acquisition, the parent company wants to keep some of the original shareholders involved to ensure stability. I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in taking a more active role." I looked up. "You mean not just take the money and walk away, but participate in management or at least hold on to the stock long term?" "Exactly. The company plans to go public within a year. If you hold on, the value of your shares could multiply several times over." I was silent for a few seconds. The old me would have been intimidated, would have thought I wasn't capable, and would have looked for a reason to say no. But now, only one thought crossed my mind. This is an opportunity. Do you think I can do it? Leo didn't answer right away. He looked at me and said, 3 months ago, when I called you, you were the only one who invested when my company was nothing. Not because you were rich, but because you had the courage to believe and the decisiveness to act. I think a person like that can do anything." His words weren't flattery, they were an assessment. I nodded. "I want to try." Leo smiled. "I thought you would." He took out another document. "This is the position I'm proposing. Assistant Project Manager. You'll have a mentor at first, and once you're up to speed, you can manage projects on your own." I looked at the paper. A new job, a new role, a path completely different from the one I had walked for 3 years as a wife. I signed the agreement. In that moment, I felt like I wasn't just starting a job. I was starting a new life. Leo put the papers away. "There's one more thing." I looked at him. "Yesterday's transfer accounting has reversed the excess amount. The balance in your account should be correct now." I nodded. "I know." Leo looked at me, a little surprised. "You're not surprised?" I smiled. I was surprised. But I'm not disappointed. He nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "Good. A person who can maintain that kind of mindset can go anywhere." We talked a little more about work, then stood up to leave. Outside the coffee shop, I didn't rush to get a taxi. I walked for a while. The morning streets were bustling with people on their way to work, to school, each person heading in their own direction, living their own life. No one knew who I was or what I had been through, and that anonymity was liberating. My phone buzzed. The screen showed Ryan's name. I stared at it for a few seconds, then declined the call. Not because I was angry, but because it was unnecessary. A few seconds later, a text came through. Clara, I want to see you one last time. It's important. I read it, and didn't reply. I had heard the phrase, one last time before. But I knew that some last times are just excuses to prolong what is already over. I put my phone away, and kept walking. By early afternoon, I was back at the hotel. As I entered the lobby, the receptionist stood up. Miss Evans, you have a visitor. I stopped. Who is it? A woman. She said her name is Jessica. I was a little surprised, not that she had come, but that she had chosen to come here. I went up to my room. If she wants to see me, please tell her she can come up. Of course. I had just changed my clothes in my room when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find Jessica standing there. She wasn't wearing a wedding dress or heavy makeup. She was in a simple t-shirt and jeans, her hair tied back in a low ponytail, her eyes slightly swollen. She looked at me and said in a small voice, Clara, can I come in and talk? I looked at her for a few seconds, then stepped aside. Please. Jessica entered the room and stood in the middle, as if unsure whether to sit or stand. I pointed to a chair. Sit. She sat, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes cast downward. After a moment, she said, Clara. I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't reply immediately. What are you sorry for? Jessica looked up, her eyes red. For intruding on your marriage. For the awful things I said. And for thinking that I had won. The last part was barely a whisper. I looked at her. And what do you think now? Jessica gave a sad smile. That I never won at all. The room was silent. She continued, after you left, Ryan and I had a fight. He said that if it wasn't for me, he wouldn't have lost you. I wasn't surprised. That was Ryan. When he lost something, he blamed someone else. And? Jessica looked at me. I just want to ask you one thing. I nodded. Go ahead. Did you really love him? The question made me pause. After a moment, I answered, yes. Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. So did I. I looked at her. For the first time, I didn't see her as the other woman. I saw her as just a woman who had chosen the wrong man. She stood up. I didn't come here to ask for your forgiveness, Clara. I just wanted to say that you weren't wrong. I said nothing. Jessica gave a slight bow, then turned and left. The door closed. I stood there for a moment. There was no triumphant feeling in my heart, only a sense of clarity. Everything was truly over. There was no one left to blame, nothing left to protect. There was only me and the road ahead. After Jessica left, the room returned to its original quiet. But this time, the silence was no longer heavy. It was a kind of rest, the kind that comes after everything has been said, faced, and there is nothing left to hide. I stood there for a while, then went out onto the balcony and looked down at the street below. Cars moved, people walked. No one knew that just moments ago, in this room, two women had sat opposite each other and said the things that should have been said long ago. I never thought I would meet Jessica under such circumstances. Much less that she would tell me, you weren't wrong. But perhaps it's only after everything is over that people can see the true nature of a relationship, and understand that winning isn't the same as being right, and possessing isn't the same as keeping. I went back inside and poured a glass of water. Just as I set it on the table, my phone buzzed again. This time, when I saw the caller ID, it wasn't Ryan or Brenda, but another unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Hello? On the other end was the trembling voice of a middle-aged woman. Clara, it's your mother-in-law, Carol. I was no longer surprised. It seemed that after Ryan, Brenda, and Jessica, it was Carol's turn. Yes. Is there something I can do for you? My voice remained distant. She was silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice no longer sharp. Clara, could you meet with me for just a little while? I didn't answer right away. What is it about? I'd like to talk in person. Not over the phone. I looked out the window. Where are you now? I'm in the lobby of your hotel. The front desk told me you were here. I was a little taken aback. She had come all the way here. I was silent for a few seconds, then said, come on up. Yes, I'll be right there. I hung up and stood there for a moment. Some encounters are unwanted, but some are not worth avoiding. 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Carol standing there. She was no longer wearing her elegant purple dress or glittering jewelry. She was in simple clothes, her hair hastily tied back, her eyes swollen. She looked as if she had aged visibly overnight. She looked at me, and her gaze no longer held its usual scrutinizing quality, only something unnameable. "Clara." I stepped aside. "Please, come in." She entered the room slowly, as if unfamiliar with the space, stood in the center, and looked around before finally sitting in a chair. I didn't sit down right away, just stood opposite her. "If you have something to say, please say it." Carol looked down, her hands clasped. Her voice was low. "Clara. I apologize to you. I didn't react. For not treating you well these past 3 years, I apologize." I was still silent. She continued, her voice choking. "I know how much you did for this family. You cared for me when I was sick, looked after Ryan's sister, helped with his company, and yet She trailed off. I looked at her. If it had been the old me, her words might have swayed me. But now, I saw only one truth. Apologies always come too late. "Is that all you have to say?" She looked up, a little surprised. I still. "Then please continue." My voice was neither cold nor warm. Carol took a breath. "Clara, I know it's too late to say anything now. But please, let me say this. You were the best daughter-in-law I ever had." I laughed quietly. "But you threw me out of the house." She looked down. I was wrong. I heard people saying you couldn't have children, that the business wasn't doing well. I thought you were a jinx." "Yes, let me say it for you." She couldn't look at me. "Yes." I nodded. "So you don't think that anymore?" She looked up, her voice frantic. No, I don't think that anymore." "Because I have money?" My direct question silenced her. But the answer was obvious. I sat down opposite her. "Carol, do you know what the saddest thing is?" She looked at me. "It's not being scolded, or thrown out, or looked down upon. It's when you've worked so hard, and no one acknowledges your effort." Carol started to cry. I know. It was my fault." I shook my head slowly. "Even if you know it now, nothing changes." The room fell silent. After a while, Carol said in a small voice, "Clara, I can't ask you to get back with Ryan. But I hope you won't push him too far." I looked at her. Those words again. Arthur said them yesterday, and Carol was saying them today. I wasn't surprised. "Do you think I'm pushing him?" He told me he's about to lose clients for his company." I cut her off quietly. "In that company, for the past 3 years, do you know who met with the clients, who secured the contracts, and who stayed up late in coffee shops to get the work done?" Carol said nothing. "I'm not taking anything from him that wasn't his to begin with. I'm just taking back what I built." Carol looked down. "I understand." But I knew she didn't fully understand. If she had, she would never have said those words. I stood up. "Is there anything else you wanted to say?" She looked at me with red eyes. "Clara, could I ask you one more thing?" I didn't answer right away. "What is it?" "This afternoon, Brenda is going back to that hotel, to apologize to you in front of everyone. I was hoping I could ask you to go easy on her, to not push her too far." I looked at her. So that was the real reason. Not to apologize, but to ask for mercy. I didn't laugh. I just said, "Yesterday, when Brenda was on that stage, insulting me in front of hundreds of people, did she ever consider if I was being pushed too far?" Carol couldn't answer. "Don't worry. I won't do anything excessive. I'll just have her correct what was said." She nodded, crying. "I understand." I stood up. "Please leave. I have things to do." Carol also stood, walked to the door, then turned back. "Clara, no matter what, I hope you find happiness." I didn't reply, just gave a slight nod. The door closed. I stood there for a while. Ryan, Brenda, Carol, 3 different apologies. But they all had one thing in common. They came only after they realized I was no longer in my old position. I didn't blame them. That was human nature. But I would not go back to how things were just so they could act as they had before. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Leo. "Do you have time this afternoon? I'd like you to meet some people from the company." I looked at the message, then at the clock. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The time Brenda was scheduled to apologize on stage. One was the past, one was the future. I smiled and texted back. "I have something to take care of. I'll head over as soon as it's done." I put the phone down, grabbed my bag, and walked out the door. This afternoon, I wasn't going for revenge. I was going to end it. I returned to the Grand Astoria 10 minutes before 3 o'clock. Not to make a grand entrance, but because I wanted a few moments to stand in the place where, just a day before, I had been cast out, and to see it again. Today, I walked in on my own terms, uninvited, unpermitted, and with no need to bow my head. The hotel lobby wasn't as festive as it had been yesterday. The wedding flowers and welcome arch were gone. But a considerable crowd had gathered, most of whom had been at the reception. They were here not out of concern, but out of curiosity, having heard that a public apology, a rare spectacle in their daily lives, was about to take place. As I walked in, many eyes turned to me. Some were curious, some were awkward, and some were wary, as if looking at someone they shouldn't get involved with. I didn't care. I walked straight into the grand ballroom. The room had been rearranged. The banquet tables were gone, replaced by rows of chairs and a small stage. A single microphone stood on the stage, simple, but sufficient for everyone to hear. A lawyer was already there. He stood in the front row and nodded as he saw me. "You've arrived." I sat down next to him. "Is everything ready?" "Yes. The content of the apology letter is as you approved it. They have also reviewed it. All that's left is for them to take the stage." I nodded. I didn't need to do anything more. Just sit here and watch. About 5 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. Brenda walked in. Yesterday, she had been in a red designer dress, her makeup perfect, laughing loudly. But today, she wore a simple black dress, no makeup, and her eyes were clearly swollen. Each step was heavy, her confident demeanor gone. Carol and Arthur followed behind her. Ryan was there too, but he hung back, not wanting to come forward. I saw him. Our eyes met for a second, and he quickly looked away. I didn't react. Brenda walked onto the stage, clutching a piece of paper in her hand. Her hand was shaking, causing the paper to rustle. The room fell silent. No one spoke, no one laughed. There were only expectant eyes. Brenda stood there for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and began to read. I am Brenda. Ryan's sister. Her voice was no longer sharp or high-pitched. It was halting. Like someone being forced to say something they didn't want to say. Yesterday, in this very room, I made inappropriate and insulting remarks about Clara Evans. She paused and swallowed hard. No one in the room interrupted her. I called Clara a worthless person, a jinx, and said she was not good enough. Each word was like a slap she was delivering to her own face. I am here to admit that those statements were false and completely without basis in fact. Brenda looked up, her red, swollen eyes meeting mine. For the past 3 years, Clara did a great deal for our family. She cared for my mother when she was sick, supported my brother's business, and was a responsible woman. The ballroom was still silent. There were no murmurs like yesterday, only focused attention. I sincerely apologized to Clara for my words and my attitude. Her voice broke. And I admit that my brother was not good enough for Clara. When she finished the last sentence, a few people in the room let out a quiet sigh. Not because they were surprised, but because they never thought Brenda would be capable of saying those words. Brenda finished reading and stood there, holding the paper, unsure of what to do. Next, the lawyer stood up and looked at me. I understood his cue. As I stood up, all eyes in the room turned to me. I walked onto the stage step by step, not too fast, not too slow, but deliberately. Brenda looked at me, her eyes a mixture of fear and exhaustion. I stood opposite her, not too close, not too far. I didn't grab the microphone right away. I just looked at her and asked, "Brenda, are you finished speaking?" Brenda nodded, her voice small. "Yes. Is there anything else you wanted to say?" Brenda shook her head. "No." I nodded. Only then did I take the microphone. The ballroom was silent. I didn't speak right away. I looked down at the faces that had listened to Brenda insult me yesterday and were now listening to her apologize. I said, my voice not loud but clear. "Yesterday, in this same room, I sat over there and listened to Brenda talk about me. The air grew heavy. She said I wasn't good enough. She said I was a burden. She said I brought misfortune to the entire family." I paused. At the time, I didn't argue. Not because I couldn't hear her, but because I wanted to hear it all. I looked at Brenda. I wanted to hear just how terrible a person I was in her eyes. Brenda looked down. I turned back to the audience. Today, she stands here and says the opposite. It's not because she suddenly had a change of heart. It's because the circumstances have changed. A few people nodded quietly. I continued, I don't need anyone to praise me as a good person. I don't need anyone to apologize to me to feel that I am right. I looked at Brenda. But there is one thing I do need. Brenda looked up, her expression anxious. "What is it?" From now on, do not judge others so easily, just because they do not have what you consider important. Brenda was silent. I said slowly. Money, status, appearance, all of these things can change. But how you treat others is what tells the story of who you are. No one in the room said a word. I put the microphone down. I accept your apology. But not so we can go back to how things were. It's so we can finally close this chapter. I set the microphone down, turned my back, and walked off the stage. There was nothing more to say, no reason to stay any longer. As I passed by Ryan, he said quietly, "Clara." I paused for a moment but didn't turn around. "Cherish what you have now. So you don't lose anything more." I walked out of the ballroom. The afternoon sun was the same as yesterday, but the feeling was different. Lighter, clearer. There were no more voices calling me back. Nothing left to hold me. I took out my phone and sent a message to Leo. "It's done, I'm on my way." One journey had ended, and another was just beginning. I stepped out of the Grand Astoria and onto the main street. The afternoon sun was the same golden color as the day before, but the feeling inside me was completely different. There was no longer a heavy weight on my chest, no need to brace myself against scrutinizing eyes. There was only a light, clean emptiness. It was like after a long rain, when the air becomes crisp and cool, and you realize just how tired you were from walking through the storm. I didn't hail a cab right away. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, watching the people go by. People walking quickly, people stopping to buy a drink, people laughing with friends. It was all so ordinary. So ordinary that it struck me. Other people's lives just keep moving forward. No one cared what I had been through yesterday. No one needed to know I had just stood on a stage listening to someone apologize. It was only important to me. To the rest of the world, I was just one small person. I let out a quiet breath and used my phone to call a car. 15 minutes later, I was standing in front of the building that housed Leo's company. It was a tall building with a gleaming glass facade. Even from the outside, I could tell it was a world away from Ryan's small, cluttered office. Not because it was bigger, but because it was run differently. There was an order to it, a structure, something that told you this was a real place of business, not a place of day-to-day scrambling. I entered the lobby, and the receptionist looked up. "May I help you?" she asked quietly. "I'm here to see Leo." "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes, he's expecting me." The receptionist checked and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Chen is waiting for you on the 18th floor. Please go on up." I nodded and got into the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw my reflection in the mirrored wall. Same face, same person. But the look in my eyes was different. The timid, uncertain look was gone, replaced by something calmer, clearer. As if I knew where I was going. The elevator stopped on the 18th floor. When the doors opened, Leo was already standing there. He wasn't wearing a stuffy suit like the ones Ryan favored, just a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked casual, but somehow incredibly capable. "You're here," he said simply. "Yes." I started walking. "It's all over." "Good," Leo nodded, not asking for any more details. "Let me show you around." He led me through the different departments, introducing each one. He wasn't trying to show off or make it seem grander than it was. He just explained things as they were, the people, their roles, the way things worked. I listened more than I spoke, but in my mind, I was naturally making comparisons. Not to belittle, but to understand. To understand why some places grow and others remain stagnant. After the tour, he took me to his office. It wasn't large, but it was organized. He poured me a glass of water and sat down opposite me. "What do you think?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "It's different." "What's different?" "Here, people are working. At my old place, people were getting by." Leo smiled quietly. "That's a pretty accurate assessment." I smiled back. After a moment, he said, "I have a proposal for you." I looked at him. "What kind of proposal?" "Come work with me. Here." I wasn't surprised, but I didn't answer right away. "In what role?" "Client development." "The same field you were in before." I nodded. "Aren't you afraid I'll bring my drama with me?" Leo shook his head. "The drama isn't with you. It's with the person who let you go." His words were simple but powerful enough. I was silent for a few seconds. "Can I have some time to think about it?" "Of course. I'm not going to pressure you. But I will say one thing. Even if you don't want to work here, you should do something for yourself. Don't go back to the old place." "Of course not. That's not even a consideration." Leo nodded and changed the subject. "Have you had dinner yet?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Let's go, then." He stood up, and I followed. We went downstairs and walked to a nearby diner. It wasn't a fancy restaurant, just a clean, simple place. It was crowded, but it felt comfortable. There was no pretense. We sat down and ordered. Leo looked at me. Are you planning to see Ryan again? I swirled the water in my glass. No. You're very firm about that. Some people, if you meet them again, will only repeat the past. Leo nodded. That's true. After a moment, it was my turn to ask. Have you ever regretted trusting the wrong person? Leo thought for a moment. Yes. And I learned that trusting them wasn't my mistake. My mistake was continuing to trust them long after I knew better. I was silent. His words felt as if they were speaking for me. Our food arrived. As we ate, we talked about small, everyday things. It made my heart feel light. There were no calculations, no guardedness, just two normal people having a conversation. After dinner, Leo drove me back. The car stopped in front of the building. I opened the door, then turned back. Thank you. For what? For not asking too many questions. Leo smiled. I know that when people are ready, they'll talk. I nodded. I got out, walked into the lobby, and pressed the elevator button. The doors closed, and I watched the numbers of the floors go up. My mind was no longer filled with old scenes or heavy words, only a plan that was beginning to form, though its shape was not yet clear. I was no longer the person who was cast out. I was the person who chose her own path. The elevator doors opened, and I walked down the hall to my room. The key card turned silently, and the door swung open. The space inside was as quiet as it had been that morning. But this time, it no longer felt empty. Because I knew that starting tomorrow, I would be starting a different journey. Without relying on anyone, without needing to prove anything to anyone, just one step at a time. And this time, I would be walking for myself. That night, I didn't fall asleep right away, but not because I was dwelling on the past. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't haunted by memories or asking myself what if. I just lay there quietly, staring at the ceiling, my mind truly empty. It wasn't an emptiness born of trying to forget, but the kind that comes only when you've truly let go. I thought about what Leo had said earlier. It wasn't advice or pressure, just a simple statement. Don't go back to the old place. It's easy to hear, but to do it, you have to make a clean break, not just with people, but with habits, ways of thinking, even the familiar sense of comfort you once clung to. I used to think stability was a good thing. But now I understood that sometimes, what we call stability is just standing still inside a circle we're too afraid to step out of. My phone on the nightstand lit up silently. Not a call, but a text message. I reached over and opened it. It was a notification from my bank. The erroneously transferred funds had been reversed, and my balance was now adjusted. The number in my account had returned to reality. It was no longer a figure that would shock a room, but for me, it was still more than enough to start over. I looked at the number for a moment, then turned off the screen. In the end, money is just a tool. What matters is what you do with it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, without an alarm, as if my body was anticipating a day to begin something new and clear. I made coffee and stood on the balcony, watching the city slowly come to life. Diners were opening, people were emerging onto the streets. The sounds of cars and voices blended into a rhythm of life that was very real, not glamorous, but persistent. I took a sip of coffee and picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts to a name I hadn't called in a long time, Mr. Davis. He had worked with my father years ago and had since started his own small, solid business. I had once vaguely thought that if the day ever came when I couldn't be with Ryan, I might go to him for help. I made the call. It rang twice before he picked up. Hello? Mr. Davis? It's Clara. There was a moment of silence, then his voice brightened. Clara. It's been a long time. What's going on? Yes, I'm sorry it's been so long. Nonsense. How are you? I heard. He trailed off. Yes, I recently got divorced. He let out a quiet sigh. I see. I'd heard a little about it. Are you all right? Yes, I'm fine, I said, not wanting to elaborate. Mr. Davis, I'm calling today because I wanted to ask you something. Is your company looking for any help these days? He didn't answer right away. Are you planning to start over? Yes. But I want to do something in a field I understand, not from scratch. He chuckled softly. I have no doubt you know your stuff. But let me ask you honestly. Do you want to work for me? Or do you want to work for yourself? His question caught me off guard. I'm not sure. He said slowly, Clara, let me be frank. You're capable. I know that. But if you work for someone else again, you'll always be in a position of dependency. If you have the funds and the experience, you should think about standing on your own. I was silent. It doesn't have to be big at first. It can be small, but it will be yours. Only then will your words carry weight. I looked out into the distance. But I'm afraid of the risk. He laughed. Of course you're afraid. It would be dangerous if you weren't. But you have to choose, security or opportunity. There's no such thing as a sure thing that's also a big thing. I didn't answer immediately. I'm not going to push you. But if you need it, I can help with suppliers and even introduce you to some old clients. The rest is up to you. I took a breath. Yes, let me think about it a little more. Good. Think it over. But don't think for too long. I smiled faintly. I won't. I hung up and stood there for a while. Two clear choices. 1. Work with Leo and get stability and an existing foundation. 2. Start on my own harder, but it would be mine. I didn't decide right away. This time, I didn't want to rush. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang again. It was Ryan. I watched the screen, letting the call go to voicemail. A moment later, a text came through. Clara, I just want to see you one last time. I looked at the message. I felt no anger, no annoyance. I just felt it was unnecessary. I put the phone down and didn't reply. Some meetings are better left to never happen. At noon, Leo called. Have you had lunch? Not yet. Come on down. I'm in the lobby. I was a little surprised. You're already here? Yep. I went downstairs, and Leo was standing there, holding 2 takeout boxes. I brought food. I figured it would be more comfortable to eat in your room. We went up to the room and opened the boxes. The smell of warm food filled the air. It was so ordinary, but it put me at ease. After a few bites, Leo asked, Have you thought about it? I put down my fork. Do you want the real answer or the safe answer? Leo smiled. Just the real one. I looked at him. I want to try it on my own. Leo nodded, not surprised. I thought you would. Do you think I'm being reckless? I do, he said bluntly. But if you weren't reckless, you wouldn't be you. I laughed. You sound like you know me so well. I don't know everything, but I've seen how you work. He paused. If you need anything, let me know. I won't interfere, but I can support you. I nodded. Okay. We continued eating. We didn't say much more, but in that moment, I felt my path had become clear. No looking back, no relying on anyone. Just moving forward on my own. That afternoon, I started writing my first business plan. It wasn't grand or complicated, just the basic steps. But it was mine. Every line, every idea was clear, realistic, and not a fantasy. I was no longer the person who was cast out. I was the person who chose her own path. And this time, I would see it through to the end. That night, I sat alone in the still empty hotel room. In front of me was a notebook filled with the plan I had just written. There was no one to rush me, no one to give orders, no one whose opinion I had to seek. Everything was up to me to decide and for me to take responsibility for. That thought was both liberating and a source of very real pressure. Because this time, if I failed, I would have no one to blame but myself. I reread every line I had written: product selection, supplier sourcing, cost calculations, risk assessment, and customer outreach strategies. It was all work I had done before, but for Ryan's company, for someone else. Now, every number, every decision was tied to me. The feeling was completely different. I was no longer completing a task, I was making a bet. I remembered what Mr. Davis had said that morning. There's no such thing as a sure thing that's also a big thing. The words echoed in my mind, not to scare me, but to ground me, to make me understand that the path I had chosen was not an easy one. My phone buzzed. A message from Leo. Finished writing? I looked at the screen, smiled quietly, and replied, almost. Don't stay up too late. You too. It was a simple, one-word gesture of care, but it warmed me. It wasn't overbearing attention, it was a perfect distance that didn't make me feel constrained. I put the phone down and continued to finish the last few lines. When the clock neared midnight, I finally closed the notebook, turned off the lights, and lay down. This time, I fell asleep almost instantly. My mind was no longer filled with wandering thoughts, but with a clear sense of direction. The next morning, I woke up early, not out of obligation, but because I had things to do. I got dressed, tied my hair back neatly, and left the hotel. My first task, to go see Mr. Davis. His company was in an old industrial park. It wasn't impressive or luxurious, but it was very real. When I walked in, the air smelled of merchandise, paper, and a faint hint of dust. It was the familiar scent of a real business, not a polished, superficial office. Mr. Davis was talking to one of his workers. When he saw me, he smiled broadly. "Clara, you're here." "Yes, good morning." He turned to the other man. "This one, she used to work for Ryan. She knows her stuff." I smiled quietly and said nothing. I waited for him to finish, and he led me into his office. "Have you decided?" he asked directly. "Yes. I've decided to do it on my own." He nodded, not a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Good. So, where are you going to start?" I opened my notebook and showed it to him. He read every line, saying nothing, occasionally nodding or frowning. When he finished, he put the notebook down. "The fundamentals are solid. But don't forget that a plan is a plan, and reality is something else." "Yes, I understand. Do you have any clients?" I shook my head. "Not yet. But I have a few old contacts in mind." He laughed. "You don't need to think about it anymore. I'll introduce you to your first two. But whether you can close the deal is up to you." I looked at him, a little surprised. "Won't it be too much trouble for you to help me so much?" He waved his hand. "I help capable people, not lazy ones. You know which type you are." I nodded. "Yes, I know." He picked up the phone, made a call, spoke briefly, and then handed the phone to me. "Introduce yourself." I took the phone, introduced myself, and stated clearly that I had started my own business. My voice didn't waver, it was steady and calm. The conversation wasn't long, but it was enough to secure a formal meeting. After I hung up, I handed the phone back to him. "See? Opportunity doesn't just come to you. But once it does, you have to grab it." I nodded. "Yes." He stood up. "Come on. I'll show you the warehouse." I followed him, looking at every product, every layout. He explained as we walked, not teaching theory, but sharing knowledge born from real-world experience. What to watch out for, common mistakes, where you're likely to get haggled down. I listened, memorized, and didn't miss a single word. Around noon, I left his company. My mind was no longer filled with vague ideas, but with concrete, actionable steps. That afternoon, I went to my first client meeting. Not in a fancy restaurant, but in a quiet coffee shop. I arrived 10 minutes early, chose a table, and prepared my documents not to impress, but to be in control. The client arrived on time. He was a middle-aged man, meticulous, and a few words. We didn't beat around the bush. We got straight to the point. I explained what I had and what I didn't have, clearly and honestly. No embellishments, no exaggerations, just the facts. He listened without interrupting. Finally, he asked, "You're just starting out. Why should I choose you over my previous supplier?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Because I'm the person who used to work for them. If their work was perfect, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to be sitting here." He was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "All right. We'll start with a small order. If it goes well, we'll consider the next one." I didn't break into a wide grin, just nodded. "Yes, thank you." I left the cafe and walked outside. The afternoon sun was warm but not harsh. I stood there for a few seconds, then let out a long breath. The first order wasn't big, but it was a first step. I didn't call or text anyone to brag. Only I knew. That night, I went home, opened my notebook, and documented everything from the day. The meeting, the client's reaction, points to improve. Not just to remember, but to do better next time. My phone rang again. It was an unknown number. I answered. "Hello?" On the other end was Ryan's voice. "Clara, it's me." I didn't interrupt him, but I didn't reply either. He continued, his voice tired. "I'm not calling to ask you to get back with me. I just wanted to ask if you were doing okay." I was silent for a moment. "I'm fine. I heard you started your own business." "Yes. I hope it goes well for you." I didn't know if he was being sincere, but I didn't need to know. "Thank you." I said that, and then I hung up. No extra words, no lingering, no drawing it out. I put the phone down and looked at the notebook in front of me. A new page, a new journey. There was no one standing behind me, no one pulling me back. There was only me, and the road ahead. The days that followed passed more quickly than I had expected, not because time was moving faster, but because I was no longer standing still, watching it go by. Every morning I woke up, there was work to be done, people to meet, orders to process, and problems to solve. It was all so concrete, so real, that there was no room left for vague thoughts or lingering emotions. The first order didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. There were shipping delays, a client changed their specifications, and the price of raw materials fluctuated, threatening my profit margin. These were things I had handled within the scope of my job when I worked for Ryan. But now, every setback directly impacted my own bottom line. There was no room for carelessness, no one else to blame. But it was in those moments that I understood, with absolute clarity, that I was no longer an employee. I was in charge. One night, alone in front of a mountain of paperwork, I was recalculating every expense for the 10th time. I found a small error that, if not corrected, would have turned the entire order into a loss. I spent nearly an hour on the phone with a supplier, renegotiating every detail. After I hung up, I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes for a few seconds, and then started to laugh. Not because I was happy, but because I realized just how far I had come from the day I sat silently at a banquet table, enduring insults. I was no longer the person who endured. I was the person who solved. About a month later, things began to find their rhythm. It wasn't all smooth sailing, but it was stable. I had gained 2 new clients, both introduced by Mr. Davis. But keeping them was up to me, and I was proud that my work was good enough for them to continue our partnership. One afternoon, as I was inspecting a shipment in my small warehouse, I got a message from Leo. "Are you free tonight?" I looked at the clock and thought for a moment. "Yes. I have a dinner with a client tonight. Want to come along?" I didn't ask for details. "Okay." That evening, I dressed in a neat but not overly formal outfit. When I arrived, Leo was already there. He looked at me, nodded, and his gaze lingered for a moment before he said, "You've changed." I smiled faintly. "How so?" "You're no longer someone who looks at other people's faces to decide where you stand." I didn't reply, but I knew what he meant. The dinner went well. I wasn't the main attraction, but Leo made a point of introducing me not as an employee or a companion, but as an independent partner. The way he spoke, the way he treated me as an equal, made the clients look at me differently, not with curiosity or suspicion, but with respect. After dinner, as we stood outside, Leo asked, "How was it?" "It was good. I'm getting used to it." "You're learning." "Yes." Leo smiled. "It's not learning. You're just remembering what you already had." We stood on the sidewalk for a while. The night air was cool and pleasant. Neither of us spoke. But it wasn't awkward at all. After a moment, Leo said, "Clara, let me ask you honestly. Have you thought about starting a new relationship?" I was a little surprised, but I didn't evade the question. "I've thought about it. But I'm not in a rush." "Are you still afraid?" I was. "But now, it's not because I'm afraid. It's because I don't want to make the wrong choice." Leo nodded. "That's fair. There's no need to rush." He didn't say more, and he didn't say less. That was all. I looked at him, and a strange feeling settled in my heart. It wasn't a frivolous flutter, but a sense of security, something I had never felt in any relationship before. In the days that followed, I continued to build my business. There were no sudden leaps, no massive successes. But every day, I became a little stronger, a little more certain. And I realized that true stability isn't about standing still, it's about moving forward without falling. One morning, I received a notification from my bank. My initial investment had officially matured, yielding a profit. The number was no longer as shocking as it had been at first, but it was enough to make me understand that what I had once sacrificed had not been for nothing. I had just learned the lesson in a more painful way. I didn't celebrate wildly, I just accepted it. Because now, I no longer measured my worth by a number. Another afternoon, as I was driving home, my car stopped at a red light. I happened to glance over and saw Ryan in an old, beat-up car. His shirt was wrinkled, and his face was noticeably thinner. He saw me too, and for a few seconds, our eyes met. There was no longer any anger or pleading in his gaze, just something vague. Maybe it was regret, maybe it was resignation. The light turned green, and my car moved forward. I didn't look back. Not out of hatred, but because it no longer mattered. That night, I went home, stood by the window, and looked out at the city. The lights stretched out endlessly. It was the same view as when I first stood here, but the feeling was completely different. I was no longer a person who had escaped a collapse, but a person who had survived it, understood it, and put it in the past. I thought about the last 3 years, the days of hard work, the sleepless nights, the moments of humiliation, the times I doubted myself. None of it had disappeared, but it no longer had the power to hurt me. It had become a part of my memory, like a lesson learned. In a voice only I could hear, I said quietly, "You did well, Clara." No one else heard it, but I did. And that was enough. My phone buzzed. A message from Leo. Are you free tomorrow? Yes. Let's get breakfast. I looked at the screen and smiled. Okay. I put the phone down, turned off the lights, lay down in bed, and closed my eyes. There were no more heavy dreams, no more recurring scenes. There was only a quiet darkness. And I knew that tomorrow, I would wake up and continue walking my own path. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to live as myself. Some people leave so that you can understand who you are. Some stumbles happen so that you can discover how strong you are. And some endings are not endings at all, but a chance to begin again, in a way that you deserve. I am no longer the person I was yesterday. I am who I am today, and I will decide who I become tomorrow. They say life is like a journey on a boat. Some people get on, and some people get off. Some travel with you for a long time, while others are with you for just one stretch before they turn in a different direction. What matters is not who stays until the end, but what you are able to keep in your heart after each farewell. Money can be earned again. A house, a car, even a reputation can be rebuilt from scratch if lost. But trust, once cracked, and sincerity, once used as a bargaining chip, can never be fully restored, no matter how much you try to mend them. That is why the most precious thing in life is not how wealthy you are, but whether there is someone who will treat you with genuine kindness when you have nothing. A person who lives with integrity will not be abandoned by fate. A person who lives with ingratitude and a cold heart will, sooner or later, lose their own good fortune. Many people are full of sentiment when they are poor, but once they have a little money, they begin to look down on the very people who walked with them through the hard times. It is only when they look back that they realize what they lost was not just one person, but a home, a sincere heart, and someone who truly loved them. Therefore, in life, do not value money so much that you forget what matters. Aging parents often need not a luxurious house, but a shared meal around a table and a word of care. The same is true in a marriage. What makes a marriage last is never just money. It is respect, and it is holding hands through difficulties instead of turning your back. An honest person may lose out temporarily, but they will not lose out for a lifetime. On the other hand, a person who is always calculating their gains and losses often ends up with no one genuinely by their side, living a life of loneliness. Do not think someone is weak just because they are gentle. Do not think someone is not hurt just because they are silent. Some people endure not because they are wrong, but because they still wish to preserve a sense of loyalty. But once a person's heart has grown cold, that very silence is the moment they have chosen to walk away. It is only after you have finished a certain stage of life that you understand, winning against yourself is more honorable than winning against others. In a world of constant change, maintaining a kind heart is the most difficult thing of all. And in the end, what brings a person the most peace is not how much money they have, but the knowledge that when they look back, they did not live a cruel life toward anyone and did not betray the person who truly loved them. If, today, someone feels exhausted, looked down upon, and treated unfairly, please do not despair. As long as you can stand up, maintain an honest heart, care for others, and love yourself, life will, sooner or later, open up a different, better path for you. Because in the end, living with integrity is never a losing game.